The morning sun peeked through the massive windows of Westwood Estate, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Elena Rivera pulled her cleaning cart along the hallway, her footsteps nearly silent on the polished surface. At 26, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with the plain gray uniform she wore. 6 weeks into her job as a housekeeper at the mansion, Elena still found herself in awe of its grandeur. The estate sat on 5 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, with a main house that could fit her entire childhood neighborhood inside it. 12 bedrooms, 15 bathrooms, 3 kitchens, an indoor pool, a home theater, and a ballroom that hadn't hosted a dance in years. All of it required constant attention. "You missed a spot." "Yesterday," came a cold voice from behind. Elena turned to find Victor Harrington standing in the doorway of his study, coffee cup in hand. At 45, Victor had the sharp features and calculating eyes of someone who viewed the world as a series of transactions. His dark hair was expertly styled, and his casual clothing probably cost more than Elena earned in a month. "I'm sorry, sir," Elena said, lowering her gaze. "Which area would you like me to focus on today?" Victor gestured vaguely toward the east wing. The guest bathroom. The chrome wasn't polished properly. He didn't wait for a response before turning back to his study, the door closing with a soft click. Elena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. In the 6 weeks she'd worked at Westwood Estate, she'd learned that brief encounters were the best kind with Victor Harrington. The self-made tech millionaire had built his fortune developing security software, and rumor among the staff was that he approached his personal life with the same cold efficiency as his business dealings. Mrs. Patel, the housekeeper who had trained Elena, had warned her on the first day. "Mr. Harrington notices everything but appreciates nothing. Do your job well, stay out of his way, and you'll be fine." So far, Elena had managed to follow that advice. She needed this job too badly to risk losing it over a personality clash with her employer. Elena made her way to the east wing bathroom and set to work on the chrome fixtures. As she polished, her mind drifted back home to San Miguel, the small town in Mexico where she'd grown up. She could almost hear her mother's voice. "Ellie, come practice before dinner." The nickname and the memory brought a smile to her face. Before financial hardship had changed everything, Elena's days had been filled with music. From age 5, when her fingers first touched a keyboard at her school's music room, everyone knew she had a rare gift. Her elementary school music teacher had arranged for her to take lessons with Professor Cardenas at the community center, who had in turn introduced her to renowned pianist Lucia Montero during a masterclass visit. "This child has the touch of a natural musician," Lucia had told her parents. "With proper training, she could have a future in music." For years, that future had seemed possible. Elena practiced 4 hours every day on the old upright piano her parents had scraped together money to buy. At 13, she won a regional competition. At 15, she performed with the Youth Symphony in Mexico City. At 17, she received offers from 3 music schools, including a partial scholarship to a conservatory in New York. Then her father lost his job when the factory closed. Her mother took on extra cleaning work but injured her back. Medical bills piled up. The piano went first, sold to pay for her mother's treatment. The scholarship offers, generous as they were, wouldn't cover living expenses in the United States. "Maybe next year," her parents had said, but next year brought more hardship. Her younger brother needed special education services. Her grandmother moved in, bringing more medical expenses. Elena put her dreams aside and found work, first at a local hotel, then as a nanny for a wealthy family who vacationed in San Miguel. When that family offered to sponsor her work visa to come to the United States as their children's nanny, it seemed like an answer to prayers. 3 years later, when the family moved to Europe, their connections had helped Elena land the job at Westwood Estate. She sent half her paycheck home each month. The rest went to her tiny apartment shared with 2 other women from similar backgrounds. They rarely saw each other, working different shifts at different wealthy homes across the city. Elena's hands worked mechanically as her thoughts wandered. She'd become efficient at cleaning during her years of domestic work. The chrome fixtures soon gleamed under the bathroom lights. As she gathered her supplies, a sound stopped her. Someone was playing the piano in the music room down the hall, playing badly. Curious, Elena followed the disjointed notes. The door to the music room stood partially open. Inside, a small girl with curly red hair sat at the magnificent grand piano, plunking out an unrecognizable tune. Elena recognized her as Zoe, the 8-year-old daughter of Patricia Lang, Victor's assistant who occasionally brought her child to work during school holidays. The girl looked up and spotted Elena in the doorway. "I'm not supposed to touch it," Zoe said, quickly pulling her hands away from the keys. "Are you going to tell?" Elena shook her head and smiled. "I won't tell. But that's a very special piano. It's a Steinway. Very expensive. Do you know how to play?" Zoe asked, scooting over on the bench. "Mom says I have to take lessons, but I hate it." Elena hesitated. She hadn't touched a piano in years. The ache of missing music had dulled over time, like a phantom limb that occasionally reminded her of its absence. "I used to play," she admitted. "Show me something, please." Zoe's eyes lit up. "Nobody ever uses this piano. Dad says Mr. Harrington just keeps it for show." Elena glanced over her shoulder toward the hallway. The music room was far from Victor's study, and she knew he had a video call scheduled for the next hour. She set down her cleaning supplies and slid onto the bench beside Zoe. The moment her fingers touched the ivory keys, something inside Elena stirred. This wasn't just any piano. This was a concert grand Steinway, the kind she'd dreamed of playing someday on a real stage. She gently pressed a key, feeling its perfect weight and response. Almost without thinking, Elena began to play the opening notes of a simple Chopin prelude. Her fingers remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The notes flowed, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. She closed her eyes, losing herself for just a moment. When the short piece ended, she opened them to find Zoe staring at her with wide eyes. "That was beautiful. You play way better than my teacher." Elena smiled and stood up quickly. "That's enough for today. I have to get back to work, and you shouldn't be in here without permission." "Can you show me again sometime?" Zoe asked, reluctantly sliding off the bench. "Maybe, but our secret, okay?" Zoe nodded solemnly, her curls bouncing. As Elena returned to her cleaning cart, her hands trembled slightly. Playing those few measures had awakened something she'd tried to bury, a hunger for music that had never really gone away. The feel of those perfect keys beneath her fingers made the upright pianos of her childhood seem like toys in comparison. Back in the hallway, Elena pushed her cart toward the next bathroom that needed cleaning. As she worked through the afternoon, melodies played in her head for the first time in years. She found herself humming softly, her movements falling into rhythm with the music in her mind. That evening, as Elena prepared to leave, Mrs. Patel handed her the week's schedule. "Mr. Harrington is hosting a dinner party this Friday," the older woman told her. "All staff will need to stay late." "He's paying extra, of course," Elena nodded. Extra pay was always welcome. "It's important this one goes perfectly," Mrs. Patel continued, lowering her voice. "These are potential investors for his new project. He's been in a mood all week about it." "I understand," Elena said, tucking the schedule into her bag. As she walked to the bus stop in the gathering dusk, Elena thought about the piano in the music room. For just a few minutes today, she'd remembered who she used to be, who she might have become in another life. The memory brought both comfort and pain. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Your brother got an A on his math test. Thanks to the tutor you're paying for." Elena smiled, typing back a quick congratulations. This was why she worked, why she'd set aside her own dreams. Family came first. It always had. But as she boarded the bus that would take her back to her shared apartment, Elena couldn't stop hearing the notes of the Chopin prelude. Couldn't forget the feel of the Steinway under her fingertips. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder, what if? Little did she know that Friday's dinner party would change everything. The day of Victor Harrington's dinner party arrived with a flurry of activity. Elena had been at the mansion since dawn, working alongside the other household staff to ensure everything was perfect. The crystal glasses gleamed under the chandelier lights. The silver cutlery had been polished until it mirrored the elaborate ceiling designs. Fresh flowers filled the rooms with their gentle scent. "Elena, please help Thomas with the table settings," Mrs. Patel instructed, checking items off her clipboard. "The caterers will be here in an hour, and Mr. Harrington wants everything ready for inspection by 4. Elena nodded and hurried to the dining room where Thomas, the elderly groundskeeper who sometimes helped with indoor tasks for special occasions, was carefully laying out the linen napkins. "Glad for the help," Thomas said with a warm smile. "These old hands aren't as steady as they used to be." Together, they arranged 20 place settings according to the diagram Mrs. Patel had provided. Each setting had to be precisely measured. The edge of the plate exactly 1 inch from the table edge. The wine glasses positioned just so, the napkins folded into perfect fans. "Who's coming tonight that's got the boss so worked up?" Elena asked as she adjusted a slightly crooked fork. Thomas lowered his voice. "Big tech investors. Word is he needs to secure at least $15 million for his new security platform to move forward. Been planning this dinner for weeks." Elena had noticed Victor's increasing tension over the past days. Twice he had made her re-clean rooms that already sparkled, finding imaginary dust on surfaces she knew were spotless. At exactly 4 o'clock, Victor appeared in the dining room doorway, dressed in a tailored gray suit that made him look even more imposing than usual. His eyes scanned the table critically. "The flower arrangement is too high," he said after a moment. "Guests won't be able to see each other across the table." Mrs. Patel appeared as if summoned. "I'll have it lowered immediately, sir." Victor nodded curtly and continued his inspection, moving through the house with Mrs. Patel trailing behind him. Elena and Thomas exchanged glances but remained silent. Everyone knew better than to speak when Victor was in one of his moods. The guests began arriving at 7. Elena, now dressed in the black and white serving uniform required for events, stood with the other staff in a line at the kitchen entrance as Mrs. Patel gave last-minute instructions. "Remember, be invisible but available. No speaking unless spoken to. And for heaven's sake, Angelo, don't spill anything like at the last party." Angelo, a college student who worked part-time serving at Victor's events, flushed red at the reminder of his previous mishap. From the kitchen, Elena could hear the murmur of conversations as the guests mingled in the great room. The caterers worked efficiently around them, putting final touches on appetizers that looked more like art pieces than food. "First round, go," Mrs. Patel instructed. Elena picked up a tray of champagne flutes and moved into the great room. She kept her eyes lowered, slipping between groups of expensively dressed people as she offered drinks. Most took a glass without acknowledging her presence, continuing their conversations as if she were indeed invisible. Latest security algorithm in the industry. Victor was saying to a cluster of attentive listeners, "Potential to corner the market in government contracts," said a woman in a striking blue dress. Elena continued her circuit of the room, returning to the kitchen for a fresh tray when needed. She noticed Zoe sitting in a corner looking bored in a frilly dress, her mother Patricia keeping one eye on her while speaking with guests. The girl brightened when she saw Elena and gave a little wave. Elena smiled back quickly before returning to her duties. Dinner was announced at 8. As the guests moved toward the dining room, Elena and the other servers took their positions. For the next hour, they moved in a carefully choreographed dance, serving courses and pouring wine without interrupting the flow of conversation. Victor sat at the head of the table, commanding attention as he outlined his vision for the new security platform. Elena, tasked with serving the guests at the far end of the table, couldn't hear the details, but she could tell from the attentive faces that he had their interest. The evening was progressing smoothly until the dessert course. Angelo, carrying a tray of wine bottles for the final pour before dessert, tripped on the edge of the carpet. He caught himself before falling, but not before a splash of red wine arced through the air and landed directly on the white shirt of a man seated to Victor's right. The room fell silent. The man, Elena would later learn he was Richard Klein, the most important investor present, looked down at the spreading stain with an expression of mild surprise. Victor's face darkened. "I apologize for my staff's incompetence," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "No harm done," Richard said, dabbing at the stain with his napkin. Hazard of wearing white to a dinner with red wine. But his casual response didn't soothe Victor's fury. Elena could see it in the tight set of his jaw, the flush creeping up his neck. The other guests shifted uncomfortably, the pleasant atmosphere evaporating. Angelo stood frozen, tray still in hand, face drained of color. "Perhaps some entertainment while your guest changes," suggested a woman seated near Victor. "I noticed the beautiful grand piano in your music room earlier." Victor seized on the suggestion, his lips curling into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, let's move to the music room for a moment while Richard sorts himself out." He stood, gesturing for the guests to follow him. The guests rose and began filing out of the dining room. Victor caught Mrs. Patel's eye and made a subtle gesture toward Angelo, who was still standing motionless by the wall. Mrs. Patel nodded in understanding. The young man would not be invited back. As the group moved down the hallway, Elena and the other servers quickly began clearing the dessert plates. Mrs. Patel approached Elena. "Take fresh coffee to the music room," she instructed, "and be careful." Elena loaded a tray with coffee cups and followed the sound of voices. The music room, rarely used, had been opened and lit for the occasion. The magnificent Steinway gleamed under the recessed lighting, its lid propped open. The guests milled about, admiring the artwork on the walls and the collection of antique musical instruments displayed in glass cases. Victor stood near the piano, speaking with Richard, who had removed his jacket but still wore the stained shirt. The wine hadn't fully set yet. A quick cold water treatment might still save it. Elena carefully served coffee, moving quietly among the guests. As she approached Victor and Richard, she heard Victor speaking. "It was my grandmother's," he was saying, gesturing to the piano, "a family heirloom. She was quite the accomplished pianist in her day." "Do you play?" Richard asked. Victor waved a dismissive hand. "No time for such pursuits. Business demands all my attention. A shame to have such a beautiful instrument go unused," Richard commented. That was when Victor noticed Elena nearby. Something shifted in his expression, a calculated look that made her stomach tighten. "Perhaps we can have a little entertainment after all," Victor said, raising his voice slightly to gain the room's attention. "You there, Maid, Elena, isn't it?" Elena froze, tray in hand. "Yes, sir." "Come here." The room quieted as she approached Victor, keeping her eyes lowered. "You're from Mexico, correct?" he asked. "Yes, sir. San Miguel." "Music is a big part of the culture there, I understand." Victor's tone was conversational, but Elena could hear the edge beneath it. "Perhaps you could play something for our guests while we wait for dessert." Elena's heart hammered in her chest. She glanced up to see 20 pairs of eyes on her. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others mildly amused. Zoe, standing beside her mother near the door, was wide-eyed. I'm working, sir," Elena said softly. "I'm giving you a new task," Victor said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Surely you must know something simple. A folk tune, perhaps? Something authentic." The way he said authentic made it clear what he was doing. He was offering her up as an exotic curiosity, something to lighten the mood after the wine incident. A diversion at her expense. Mrs. Patel appeared at the doorway, sensing a situation. But before she could intervene, Zoe piped up, "She can play. I heard her." All eyes turned to the little girl, who immediately shrank back against her mother. "Is that so?" Victor's eyebrows rose. He turned back to Elena, the challenge clear in his expression. "Well then, please share your talents with us." Elena felt trapped. To refuse would likely cost her job. To comply meant submitting to Victor's attempt to humiliate her. She looked at the piano gleaming under the lights. 3 years since she had last played, except for those few moments with Zoe. "The tray, please," Victor said, taking the coffee service from her hands and passing it to a nearby server. Left with no excuses and no escape, Elena moved woodenly to the piano bench. The guests watched with expressions ranging from discomfort to curiosity. Someone snickered softly. She sat down, her uniform skirt crinkling beneath her. The keys gleamed white and black before her, both familiar and strange. Elena placed her hands on the keyboard, feeling the cool ivory beneath her fingertips. What should she play? A simple folk tune, as Victor had mockingly suggested, or perhaps a basic exercise, the kind beginners practiced. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and decided that if this was to be her last night at Westwood Estate, she would at least leave with her dignity intact. Elena's fingers settled into position, and she began to play. The room fell silent as Elena sat at the piano. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. 20 pairs of eyes watched her, some curious, some pitying, some amused at the spectacle of the maid being put on display. Victor stood nearby, a satisfied smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. He had created this moment of discomfort to distract from the earlier wine spill, and she was the convenient target. Elena stared at the keys, her fingers hovering uncertainly. 3 years since she'd properly played. 3 years of her music lying dormant inside her, like a language nearly forgotten from disuse. What came back first were not her fingers but her ears, the memory of sound. of how this magnificent instrument should sing under the right touch. She placed her hands in position and began to play the only thing that felt right in that moment, Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. It had been the last piece she'd mastered before life took her away from music, the crowning achievement of her young career as a pianist. The first notes came hesitantly. Her fingers felt stiff, unpracticed. A wrong note here. A stumble there. She heard a soft chuckle from somewhere in the room and felt her cheeks burn. But then something shifted. The muscle memory of thousands of hours of practice began to awaken. Her hands remembered what her conscious mind had tried to forget. The notes began to flow more smoothly, the phrases connecting as they should. Elena closed her eyes, shutting out the watching faces. She forgot about Victor, forgot about the expensive clothes and judging stares. There was only the music now, the gentle opening theme giving way to the building storm of emotions that followed. As the piece progressed, her confidence grew. Her fingers found their old strength and agility. The room around her disappeared entirely, and Elena was transported back to her small hometown, to the community center where she had once played this very piece for her teacher, Professor Cardenas, who had wept openly at the beauty she'd created. The Steinway responded to her touch like a living thing. Unlike the tired, upright piano of her childhood, this instrument had depth and power, colors and textures she had only dreamed of coaxing from a keyboard. Now her hands drew forth sounds that matched the music in her mind. Delicate passages that floated like whispers, thunderous sections that rolled like waves. The middle section of the ballade surged forward, growing more complex and passionate. Elena's body swayed slightly as she played, her face reflecting the changing moods of the music, contemplative in the quieter sections, intense during the dramatic climbs. A single tear escaped down her cheek, but she didn't notice, lost as she was in the world Chopin had created, a world she was now rebuilding note by note. The room had transformed. The guests, who had expected an awkward performance to laugh about later, now stood transfixed. Someone who had been raising a coffee cup to their lips had frozen mid-movement. Another guest had sunk into a nearby chair, eyes closed to better absorb the sounds. Even the servers who had been clearing dessert plates in the dining room had paused their work, listening from the hallway. Victor's smug smile had vanished. He stood rigid, his eyes fixed on Elena's hands as they moved across the keyboard with increasing confidence and authority. This was not the fumbling attempt he had expected. This was not entertainment at someone else's expense. This was artistry of a level rarely encountered outside concert halls. As the piece built toward its tumultuous conclusion, Elena felt a strange sense of healing. Each note she played was reclaiming a part of herself she had packed away. The final pages of the ballad require not just technical mastery, but emotional commitment, crashing chords and rapid runs that demand everything from the performer. Elena gave it all, her breath coming faster, her heart racing not with anxiety now but with the physical exertion and emotional release of the music. The final notes rang out, powerful and resolute. Then silence. Elena's hands rested on the keys. She kept her eyes closed for a moment longer, unwilling to break the spell, afraid to return to reality. When she finally looked up, she was met with a sight she never could have imagined. The room remained perfectly still. Richard Klein, the investor who had been the victim of the wine spill, had tears in his eyes. A woman in an emerald dress was pressing a handkerchief to her mouth. Zoe, the little girl who had exposed Elena's secret, was beaming with an "I told you so" expression aimed at the adults around her. And Victor Harrington, looked as though he'd seen a ghost. The color had drained from his face, his usual mask of control completely shattered. He stared at Elena as if seeing her for the first time. The silence held for 3 more heartbeats. Then the room erupted in applause. "Brava! Incredible! My God, where did you learn to play like that?" The questions and compliments came from all directions. People moved toward the piano, their earlier discomfort at her presence forgotten. Richard Klein approached first, extending his hand as if she were a fellow guest rather than staff. "That was extraordinary," he said, shaking her hand warmly. "Chopin's G minor ballade is one of the most challenging pieces in the piano repertoire, and you played it beautifully. Are you professionally trained?" Before Elena could answer, a tall man with silver hair pushed forward. "Alexander Petrov," he introduced himself. "I conduct the City Symphony Orchestra." Tell me, where did you study? Elena felt overwhelmed by the attention. I never completed my formal training, she managed to say. I studied in San Miguel until I was 17, but then life got in the way, finished a woman who had moved to stand beside Alexander. I recognize that story. It was the same for my brother. But talent like yours doesn't just vanish. Mrs. Patel appeared at Elena's side, looking both concerned and proud. Perhaps Elena should return to her duties now, she suggested gently, sensing Elena's discomfort at being the center of attention. Nonsense, said Richard. She must join us for dessert. He turned to Victor, who still stood frozen near the piano. Victor, did you know you had a concert pianist cleaning your house? What a remarkable discovery. Victor seemed to struggle to regain his composure. I had no idea. He cleared his throat. Elena, why didn't you mention your background? The question hung in the air, highlighting the absurdity of the situation. Why would a housekeeper discuss her past musical training with an employer who barely acknowledged her existence? Elena met his eyes directly for the first time. It never seemed relevant to my work here, sir. A flush crept up Victor's neck. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, the social dynamics of the room suddenly complicated by this unexpected revelation. Alexander Petrov broke the tension. Well, it's certainly relevant now. He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to Elena. Call my office tomorrow. We should discuss your future. The word future hung in the air like a promise. Elena took the card with trembling fingers. Thank you, she said softly, still struggling to process what was happening. Dessert is ready in the dining room, Mrs. Patel announced, gently steering the conversation back to safer ground. The guests began to drift back toward the dining room, many pausing to speak a few words to Elena or touch her shoulder in passing. Zoe bounced up to the piano. I told you she could play, she said proudly to no one in particular. Only Victor remained apart, watching the scene unfold with an unreadable expression. When the room had cleared except for Elena and himself, he approached the piano slowly. That was... He seemed to search for words. Unexpected. Elena stood from the bench, suddenly aware again of her uniform, of the gap between employer and employee that had momentarily vanished during her performance. I should help serve dessert, she said, moving to step away from the piano. Wait. Victor's voice had lost its usual sharp edge. How long have you been playing? Since I was 5, Elena replied. But it's been 3 years since I played regularly. Victor's eyebrows rose. 3 years without practice, and you can play like that? Elena didn't know how to respond. The conversation felt surreal, standing in her server's uniform discussing music with the man who, an hour ago, had tried to humiliate her. Music stays with you, she said finally. In your hands, in your heart. It doesn't leave even when you have to leave it. Something flickered in Victor's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or regret. He nodded slowly. You should go join the others, he said. Your audience awaits. Elena hesitated. Sir, I'm still on duty. I should consider yourself reassigned for the evening. His tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. As Elena walked toward the dining room, she felt strangely light, as if a weight she'd been carrying had lifted. The business card in her pocket seemed to pulse with possibility. Whatever happened tomorrow, whether she kept this job or lost it, whether Alexander Petrov's interest led somewhere or nowhere, tonight, for a few minutes she had been herself again. Behind her, Victor Harrington remained in the music room alone, staring at the piano as if it had revealed secrets he never knew it held. The next morning, Elena arrived at Westwood Estate at her usual time. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying the events of the previous evening, the feeling of the Steinway under her fingers, the shocked faces of the guests, Alexander Petrov's business card, which she'd placed carefully on her nightstand. Her roommates had been asleep when she got home, so she hadn't shared her story yet. The whole experience felt like a dream, the kind you're afraid will dissolve if you speak of it too soon. As Elena used her key card to enter through the service entrance, she half expected to find her belongings packed up, her employment terminated. Instead, Mrs. Patel was waiting for her in the staff room, a strange expression on her face. Good morning, Elena said hesitantly. Mrs. Patel smiled, a rare sight that immediately put Elena on alert. Good morning, Elena. Mr. Harrington would like to see you in his study. Elena's stomach tightened. Now, as soon as you arrive, no need to change into your uniform first. Mrs. Patel placed a gentle hand on Elena's arm. That was quite a performance last night. I didn't plan it, Elena said quickly. He asked me to play and I— No need to explain, Mrs. Patel interrupted. Everyone was impressed. The older woman's tone suggested there was more to the story, but she clearly wasn't going to elaborate. Elena set down her bag and headed for Victor's study, her heart pounding much like it had before she'd started to play the night. Before, she knocked softly on the study door. "Come in," called Victor's voice. Elena entered to find him, sitting behind his massive desk, a stack of papers in front of him. He wasn't alone. Richard Klein, the investor who had suffered the wine spill, sat in one of the leather chairs facing the desk. Both men looked up as she entered. "Ah, Elena," Victor said, rising to his feet. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Elena perched nervously on the edge of the other leather chair, feeling out of place in her jeans and simple blouse. Richard Klein smiled at her warmly. "I was just telling Victor what a pleasure it was to hear you play last night," he said. "Truly remarkable." "Thank you," Elena managed to say, still unsure why she'd been called to this meeting. Victor sat back down, studying her with an intensity that made her want to fidget. He seemed different today, the cold, demanding employer replaced by someone more thoughtful, more uncertain. "Elena, I'll be direct," he said after a moment. "Last night revealed something I didn't know about you. Something quite extraordinary." Elena waited, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "It also revealed something about me that I'm not particularly proud of," Victor continued, surprising her. "My behavior was inappropriate. I put you in that position to create a diversion, expecting you would stumble through a simple tune at best. I didn't anticipate," he gestured vaguely with one hand, "that you were a virtuoso," Richard finished for him. Elena felt her cheeks warm at the praise. "I wouldn't say that. I haven't played seriously in years." "Which makes it all the more remarkable," Richard said. He turned to Victor. "I'll let you continue your conversation. I need to make some calls before our meeting at 10. He stood and extended his hand to Elena. "I hope we'll meet again soon." After Richard left, Victor leaned back in his chair, regarding Elena with a curious expression. "I've been doing some research," he said, tapping his computer screen. "About San Miguel. About piano competitions in Mexico. About a young prodigy who disappeared from the music scene several years ago." Elena's breath caught. "You were researching me?" Victor nodded. "After you left the party last night, Alexander Petrov couldn't stop talking about you. He seemed to think your name sounded familiar. This morning I found several articles." He turned his screen toward her. On it was a newspaper article from 7 years ago, featuring a photo of a much younger Elena accepting a trophy at a regional competition. The headline read, "Local prodigy dazzles judges, earns scholarship opportunity." "That feels like another lifetime," Elena said softly. "What happened?" Victor asked. The question was direct, but his tone lacked its usual sharpness. Elena hesitated. She'd never discussed her past with employers before. But after last night, the usual boundaries seemed to have shifted. "My family needed me," she said simply. "My father lost his job. My mother hurt her back. Medical bills. My brother needed special schooling. The scholarships I was offered wouldn't cover living expenses in the United States." Victor's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "So you gave up music to support your family?" Elena nodded. "It wasn't a choice, really. It was just what needed to be done." A silence fell between them. Outside the study windows, the morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawn. Somewhere in the house, a vacuum cleaner hummed. "Have you called Petrov?" Victor finally asked. "Not yet. I was going to do it after work today." Victor studied her for a moment longer, then reached a decision. "I'd like to make you an offer." Elena tensed, unsure what to expect. "I want to sponsor your return to music," he said. The words hung in the air between them. Elena stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "I don't understand," she said finally. Victor leaned forward, resting his elbows on his desk. "I have connections with the music conservatory downtown. I sit on their board of directors, actually. With some private coaching to get you back up to speed, I believe you could audition for their special adult program." Elena felt lightheaded. "Why would you do that?" Victor's gaze shifted away from her toward the window. "Let's call it making amends for last night." But Elena sensed there was more to it than that. "Mr. Harrington, Victor, please." "Victor," she corrected, the name feeling strange on her tongue. "This is very generous, but I can't accept. I need my job. My family depends on what I send home." "You misunderstand," he said. "I'm not suggesting you quit. You would continue working here, on a modified schedule to accommodate your studies. Your salary would remain the same." Elena blinked, trying to process his words. That's too generous. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Victor replied. "Talent like yours shouldn't be wasted cleaning houses." "But why?" Elena pressed. "Why would you do this for me?" Victor was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its usual confidence. "My grandmother, the one who owned that piano, was a concert pianist," he said. "She toured Europe in the 1950s. When I was a boy, she tried to teach me to play. I had no talent for it, no patience. I quit after 6 months of lessons." He smiled faintly at the memory. It disappointed her deeply. She told me music was a gift that should never be abandoned. He met Elena's eyes again. "When you played last night, you reminded me of her, and of a promise I made to her before she died, that I would use my resources to support young musicians. It's a promise I haven't kept. Until now." Elena sat with this revelation, seeing Victor in a new light. The cold, demanding employer had layers she'd never glimpsed before. "I still don't know if I can accept," she said honestly. "It's been so long. I might not be good enough anymore for a program like that." "That's why we start with private coaching," Victor said, "to see where you stand. No commitments beyond that until you're ready." Elena thought of the feeling that had washed over her last night when her hands touched the keyboard, like coming home after a long absence. The idea of returning to music even partially made her heart race. "Can I think about it?" she asked. Victor nodded. "Of course. But don't take too long. Petrov isn't the only one who recognized your talent last night. Several guests mentioned you to me after you left." As if on cue, there was a knock at the study door. "Come in," Victor called. Mrs. Patel entered, looking slightly flustered. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Elena has phone calls waiting. 3 of them, actually." She glanced at Elena. "Alexander Petrov, Dean Chen from the conservatory, and a reporter from the Daily Chronicle. They're all asking to speak with her." Elena's eyes widened. "A reporter?" Victor chuckled. "Word travels fast in certain circles. Richard must have made some calls this morning." He stood up. "You can take the calls in here. I have a meeting downtown anyway." He gathered his papers and briefcase, then paused at the door. "Think about my offer. Whatever you decide, your job here is secure." After he left, Elena sat alone in his study, trying to process everything that had happened in the past 12 hours. Her world had shifted on its axis, possibilities opening up that she had long ago forced herself to stop dreaming about. Mrs. Patel reappeared with a cordless phone. "Petrov first," she said, handing it to Elena. "He's been most persistent." As Elena took the phone, a text message chimed on her personal cell. It was from her mother. "Why is a newspaper from the city calling us about you?" "What's happening, Ellie?" Elena stared at the message, reality crashing back. Her family, her responsibilities, her carefully constructed life built on practicality rather than dreams. Could she really find a way to have both? To honor her obligations while reclaiming her passion? She took a deep breath and raised the cordless phone to her ear. "Hello, Mr. Petrov. Yes, this is Elena Rivera." 6 months passed in a whirlwind of change. Elena's days now followed a new rhythm. Mornings at Westwood Estate, afternoons at the conservatory with her piano coach, evenings practicing on the Steinway in Victor's music room, which he had insisted she use. "It's ridiculous for you to practice on that old upright at your apartment building when there's a perfectly good concert grand sitting unused here," he'd said when she hesitated to accept. Today marked a special milestone. Elena stood backstage at the Hamilton Concert Hall, peeking through the curtain at the filling auditorium. Her first public recital in years. Not a full concert, just one piece in a showcase of promising students, but a significant step nonetheless. "Nervous?" asked Professor Lily Wong, her coach for the past 6 months. Elena nodded, smoothing down the simple black dress she'd purchased for the occasion. "A little. It's been a long time since I performed for an audience this size." "You're ready," Professor Wong assured her. "Your technique has returned remarkably quickly, and your musicality was never lost, just dormant. The past months had been challenging but exhilarating. Returning to rigorous practice after years away from the piano had left Elena with aching hands and forearms at first. Building her technique back to its former level required hours of daily work. There were moments of frustration when her fingers wouldn't cooperate with what her mind knew they should do, but there were also moments of pure joy. When a difficult passage suddenly flowed effortlessly, when she discovered new depths in pieces she'd known since childhood, when she felt herself connecting to the music in ways her younger self couldn't have appreciated. Through it all, Victor had kept his word. Her work schedule adjusted to accommodate lessons and practice time. Her salary remained unchanged despite her reduced hours. Once a week they shared dinner in the small breakfast room of Westwood Estate, where he asked about her progress and she gradually learned more about the man behind the stern facade. 5 minutes, called the stage manager, interrupting Elena's thoughts. She stepped back from the curtain and took several deep breaths. In the front row of the audience sat her mother and brother, who had flown in yesterday for her performance. Their tickets and hotel arranged by Victor without her knowledge until they called with the news. It would be the first time they'd heard her play in years. Also in the audience were Mrs. Patel, Thomas the groundskeeper, and even Zoe with her mother Patricia. Alexander Petrov had promised to attend as well, his interest in Elena's talent unwavering since the night of the dinner party. And Victor. He'd been uncharacteristically quiet when she'd left Westwood Estate that morning, simply wishing her luck with an awkward pat on the shoulder. The student before Elena finished his piece, a Schubert impromptu performed with technical skill if not deep emotion. Polite applause followed as he bowed and exited the stage. Elena Rivera, performing Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor, Opus 23, announced the master of ceremonies. A hush fell over the auditorium as Elena walked onto the stage. The spotlights were brighter than she'd expected, making it difficult to see faces in the audience. She bowed quickly, then settled at the piano bench, adjusting its height slightly. For a moment she sat perfectly still, gathering herself. This was the same piece she'd played the night everything changed, the night Victor had tried to humiliate her only to discover her secret talent. It seemed fitting to mark her return to music with it. Elena began to play. The opening notes, questioning, hesitant, filled the hall. As before, she felt herself transported by the music, but this time without the shock and disbelief that had colored her impromptu performance 6 months ago. Now she played with intention, with renewed skill honed by months of dedicated practice. The ballade unfolded, its narrative flowing through her fingers, the gentle beginning giving way to mounting tension, moments of sweetness interrupted by gathering storms, the final dramatic rush to its conclusion. When the last powerful chords faded away, Elena remained momentarily frozen, her hands still on the keys. The applause that followed startled her with its enthusiasm. She rose and bowed, her eyes adjusting to the lights enough to make out her mother in the front row wiping tears away. Her brother stood beside her, clapping vigorously. As Elena left the stage, Professor Wong embraced her. "Beautiful," she whispered. "Absolutely beautiful." The rest of the showcase passed in a blur. After the final performer, the students returned to the stage for a group bow. Then it was time to meet family and friends in the lobby. Her mother reached her first, wrapping Elena in a tight hug. "My Ellie," she said in Spanish. "You played like an angel. Even better than before." Her brother hugged her next. "That was awesome, sis. All those hours of practice when we were kids totally paid off." Mrs. Patel, Thomas, and the others offered their congratulations. Alexander Petrov spoke briefly with her about an upcoming competition she might consider entering. Through it all, Elena searched the crowd for Victor. She finally spotted him standing apart from the others, watching the scene unfold. When their eyes met, he gave her a small nod and raised his hand in a gesture that somehow conveyed both congratulations and farewell. Then he turned and headed toward the exit. "Excuse me," Elena said to the others. "I'll be right back." She hurried after Victor, catching up to him just as he reached the doors. "You're leaving already?" she asked. He turned, seeming almost surprised to see her. "I thought you'd want to celebrate with your family." "They've come a long way." "They have," Elena agreed. "But you're part of this too. None of it would have happened without you." Victor's expression softened. "That's not true. You had this talent all along. I just removed some obstacles." "More than that," Elena insisted. "You believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. They stood in silence for a moment, the noise of the reception continuing behind them. "I have something for you," Victor said finally, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out an envelope and handed it to her. "I was going to leave it at the house, but since you're here..." Elena opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. As she read, her eyes widened. "A full scholarship? To the conservatory's performance program?" Victor nodded. The board voted unanimously after hearing Professor Wang's recommendation. "It's a special mid-year admission. But my job is still yours for as long as you want it," Victor assured her. "But this opportunity would require your full attention. You can't properly pursue a performance career while cleaning houses, Elena." The reality of what he was offering sank in. "What about my family? The money I send home..." "We can work something out," Victor said. "A stipend, perhaps. Or an actual scholarship fund that includes living expenses for you and support for your family. The details can be arranged." Elena stared at him, overwhelmed by his generosity. "Why are you doing all this for me?" Victor was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Do you know what the word redemption means to me, Elena?" She shook her head. "It's the chance to correct a wrong, to make something right that once went terribly wrong." He looked past her toward the auditorium they'd left. "6 months ago, I tried to use you for entertainment at someone else's expense. It was cruel and thoughtless. The kind of thing I've done too often in my life because I could." He met her eyes again. "Your playing that night didn't just reveal your talent. It revealed something broken in me, something I've been trying to fix since then." "By helping me?" Elena asked softly. "By remembering what matters. Not money or power or impressing investors, but human connection, beauty, art." He gestured toward the letter in her hands. "Your music reminded me of that." Before Elena could respond, her brother appeared beside her. "Mom's wondering where you went," he said, then noticed Victor. "Oh, sorry to interrupt." "Not at all," Victor said smoothly. "I was just leaving." He extended his hand to Elena's brother. "You must be Daniel. Your sister has told me a lot about you." As they shook hands, Elena watched Victor transform into the charming host she'd seen at countless dinner parties. But now she could see beneath the surface to the more complex man underneath. "Will you come back inside?" she asked Victor. "Just for a little while. I'd like you to meet my mother." Something flickered in Victor's eyes, surprise perhaps, or gratitude for the inclusion. He nodded. "I'd be honored." Later that evening, as her family rested at their hotel, Elena returned to Westwood Estate alone. The house was quiet, most of the staff gone for the day. She made her way to the music room, drawn to the piano that had changed her life. As she sat at the bench, she thought about the journey of the past 6 months. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Returning to full-time study at her age would bring challenges. Building a performance career after years away from music would require tremendous work and probably many setbacks. But for the first time in years, Elena felt whole. The two halves of herself, the practical survivor who did what was necessary and the passionate artist who lived through music, were no longer at war. She began to play softly, a gentle Chopin nocturne that floated through the quiet house. She didn't hear Victor pause in the hallway outside, listening with a small smile before continuing to his study, leaving her to her music and her dreams. The future, uncertain as it was, held promise. And that was enough.